Hello, good morning or good evening or where whatever time it might be for you wherever you are around the world. Welcome to episode 2 of something I'm doing called philosophical waffle. Um, but the concept of this is basically quite simple. And someone who's a complete idiot philosophically, moi, talks about philosophical things and topics and maybe try to learn a bit as we go kind of thing. That's kind of the thing. I'm probably going to make loads of screw ups throughout this, which is kind of the point in a way, so that people can correct me or give me pushback or whatever if they think I'm completely wrong on something. So yeah, again, I only did this really because I just did a random stream the other day, and I realised I was kind of just waffling on about philosophy. So I just thought I'd call it, hey, philosophical waffle. Makes a bit of sense, doesn't it? Eh? That's just kind of all it is. What I did last time is I sort of brought up some articles and stuff to read, and then because obviously, bear in mind, I'm an atheist and I do atheist content. I read a couple of extracts of this little book, which I'm sort of going through at the moment. Which I'll probably do again a bit later. This is Graham Oppy's Atheism: The Basics. Um, yeah, Davros, I know you will. So anyway, so hi to Davros, Tina, Dog. Who else? I saw Math Pigs lurking in there somewhere in the back as well. Good to see you all. So what we're going to start with today, I'm going to start with I don't know, it's something everyone I think's sort of familiar with, I suppose. So let's not go too deep today. I mean, I think I might have been a bit over ambitious doing objective and subjective morality as a sort of first topic, really. But hmm, so maybe we'll just start with something a little bit more simple that everyone's probably knows and has heard of, and we're going to start with the trolley problem. Probably, I bet most people have heard of this. And I'll guarantee you, any of you who have either appeared on or have watched Critical Cripple show will know that Critical Cripple used to throw in a few variants of the trolley problem here and there as a question. So even if you don't know what the exact thing is, once you explain the concept, um, you know, you'll all have known this as these kind of questions. So I'm going to start off with an article from a site called The Conversation, and we'll read this. Imagine you were standing beside some train tracks. In the distance, you spot a runaway trolley hurtling down the tracks towards five workers who cannot hear it coming. Even if they do spot it, they won't be able to move out of the way in time. As disaster looms, you glance down, you see a lever connected to the tracks. You realize that if you pull the lever, the tram will be diverted down the second set of tracks away from the five unsuspecting workers. However, down the side track, there's this one lone worker just as oblivious to his colleagues. So, would you pull the lever, leading to one death but saving five? So this is the crux of the classic thought experiment known as the trolley dilemma, developed by philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967 and adopted by Judith Jarvis Thompson in 1985. So again, you probably all heard of this, or you're aware of a variation of this. Um, okay, the trolley dilemma allows us to think that through the consequences of an action and consider whether its moral value is determined solely by its outcome. The trolley dilemma has since proven itself to be a remarkably flexible tool for probing our moral intuitions and has been adapted to various other scenarios such as war, torture, drones, abortion, euthanasia, etc. And I would say, history as well, which is something I'll come on to in a bit. Now, variations. Now, consider the second variation of this dilemma. Imagine you were standing on a footbridge above the tram tracks and you see the runaway trolley hurtling down towards the five unsuspecting workers, but there's no lever to divert it. However, there is a large man standing next to you on the footbridge. You're confident that his bulk would stop the tram in its tracks. So, would you push the man on off the bridge and onto the track, sacrificing him in order to stop the tram, thereby saving five others? Good questions, aren't they? Good questions. So, so yep, yep, indeed, bearded heretic, 10 a.m. I'm talking the trolley problem. Actually, this is something you probably are more than familiar with. Or more, I've just got onto the footbridge dilemma now. So now the outcome of this scenario is identical to the one with the lever diverting the trolley onto another track. One person died, five live. The interesting thing is that while most people would throw the lever, very few would approve of pushing the fat man off the bridge. Says here, Thompson and other philosophers have given us variations on the trolley dilemma, so that that, that are also scarily entertaining. Some don't even include the trolley itself. Imagine you are a doctor, you have five patients, and who all need transplants in order to live. Two require one lung, another require a kidney, fifth requires a heart. In the next ward, there's another individual recovering from a broken leg, but other than their knitting bones, they're perfectly healthy. Would you kill the healthy patient to harvest their organs to save five others? Again, the consequences are the same as the first dilemma, but most people would utterly reject the notion of killing a healthy patient. So, which I think we can all agree of. So, no, I haven't. No, I haven't. Davros, no. Okay. Goes on to this actions, intentions, and consequences. If all the dilemmas above have the same consequence, yet most people would be willing to throw the lever but not push the fat man or kill the healthy patient, does this mean our moral intuitions are not always reliable, logical, or consistent? Perhaps there's another factor beyond the consequences that influences our moral intuitions. And it says here, Foote argued that there's a distinction between killing and letting die. The former is active while the latter is passive. Um, in the first trolley dilemma, the person who pulls the lever is saving the life of five workers and letting one person die. After all, pulling the lever does not inflict direct harm on the person on the side of the track on the side, but the footbridge scenario, pushing the fat man over the side, is an intentional act of killing. Um, This is sometimes described as the principle of double effect, which states that it's permissible to indirectly cause harm as a side to or double effect if the action promotes an even greater good. However, it's not permissible to directly cause harm even in the pursuit of the greater good. So Thompson offered a different perspective. She argued that moral theories that judge the permissibility of an action based on its consequences alone, such as consequentialism or utilitarianism, cannot explain why some actions that cause killings are permissible while others are not. So, everybody following this so far? Irrelevant, dog. Irrelevant. Okay, so where are we at? Okay, if we consider that everyone has equal rights, then we would be doing something wrong in sacrificing one, even if our intention was to save five. So this is research done by neuroscientists has investigated which parts of the brain were activated when people considered the first two variations of the trolley problem. They noted that in the first version, our logical, rational mind uh, thus, we decided to pull the lever because it was intended to save a larger number of lives. However, when we consider pushing the bystander, our emotional reasoning becomes involved, and therefore we feel that differently about killing one in order to save five. Are our emotions in this instance leading us to the correct actions? Should we avoid sacrificing one, even if it is to save five? So this is a fascinating. So this is a fascinating questions here, and as Bearded Heretic points out, do we restrict the liberties of everyone in order to save some of the most vulnerable people? Very, very, very poignant considering the last couple of years. And I'd say, yeah, we kind of do, but again, it's interesting. Now, it goes actually we're going into real world dilemmas. The trolley dilemma and its variations demonstrate that most people approve of some actions that cause harm, yet other actions that, with the same outcome, are not considered permissible. Not everyone will answer the dilemma in the same way, and even when people agree, they may vary in their justification for the action they defend. Um, these thought experiments have been used to stimulate discussion about the difference between killing versus letting die, and have even appeared in form or another in the popular culture, such as in the film Eye in the Sky. I've never seen that movie, honestly. So I think that's the end of that article. I do have another one pull up, but I'd like to know what people think about that so far. I mean, I think it does raise some. I mean, again, I said earlier, any of us who've been on Critical Cripple's show or watched that, like, know that Critical Cripple would throw a variation of this dilemma um, out every so often. And I think I probably noticed that we answered differently in depending on the way the question was asked. I think I noticed that. And I said, there's also, and it is because it's always is this arguing that there is a greater good if, but that now it's the thing, is the greater good always the thing? Do you commit an act of evil for a greater good? And I will say, like I said, there are all these variations of the trolley problem. Um, now the one I really don't like is when we do like the historical ones, and it's um, the one I often hear are asked, and I don't, and the reason I don't, well, there's two reasons really. As it's not, I don't think it's always asked correctly, and it's the what I call the everyone's heard the baby Hitler problem. That if you could travel back in time and kill Hitler if he was a baby, would you do it? But it is often the question is asked purely in that way, and is not asked in the sense of would you go back in time, remove Hitler if it meant everything like National Socialism, that World War II, everything else didn't happen. Which is probably a better way of asking the question, but I don't like it because usually I've found that people just ask the question, would you go back in time and remove Hitler when he was a baby from the equation? And I've often said, well, if you're asking it purely in that sense, my answer would be no, because then you're actually playing into history, and I'm not convinced that just removing him from the equation would have made events go much differently. In all honesty, in fact, I actually was going to do a whole video on that at one point, but we you never got round to it. I was actually going to collaborate with someone on that, but we just never got round to it for various reasons. Okay, now answer some reason. Hey, Joe says the problem of dirty hands is a great way to think about morality. Actually, can you phrase that a particular one? Um, you know, and nerdy. I think again, I don't necessarily know what age is. To me, I don't know that it's particularly relevant to the question. I suppose it might be. I suppose if, but to me, it's like, well, again, Claire. That's the thing with the way this question that particular question is asked. Okay, um, and like I said, you've got to really specify that it would mean if it meant everything else, didn't happen. But that's just a version of it I don't like. So say, okay, so the problem with dirty hands is basically you can do anything, something immoral for a better outcome. Okay, yeah, and this is always a good question. I mean, generally speaking, you can probably always argue, yeah, there's maybe there you can do something immoral for a greater good, but then it kind of again it like this whole thing proves that with the way that the trolley problems are asked, is there, well, at what point, where do you draw the line? Where do you actually draw the line? And I don't know that I have an answer. Now I've got something up as well on this thing from you know uh, from philosophy now, saying could there be a solution to the trolley problem? I won't read the first part of it because I think it just more or less goes back over what I covered already. I'm just going to go right back to the things as uh, various solutions, and it says this. I have noticed when first presented with the trolley problem, many people tend to think the different ways in which the obvious tragedies, namely the death of one or five individuals, depending on one choice, but could be avoided altogether. For instance, in a real world scenario, one might be able to loudly warn the workmen on the tracks, well, of the approaching trolley in anticipation that they will move, save their lives themselves. But that would obviously misses the point of the entire thought experiment in the first place. The trolley problem sets up a moral dilemma in which is one is to decide whether to steer the trolley in the first scenario and whether to push the man off the bridge in the second. So, one person dies as opposed to five. Those are the only options available. So, what is one to do? Goes on to say that Foot's own response to the trolley problem was that the morally justified action would be to steer the trolley to kill the one workman, thus saving, a net of four lives overall. In order to demonstrate the morality of this, she made a distinction between what she called negative duties and positive duties. In the broad sense, she defined negative duties as the obligation to refrain from harming others, and positive duties as the obligation to actively do good, in this case, to save lives. She argued that, as a matter of principle, our negative duties to refrain from harm are always more urgent and weigh in on our positive duties. So, one is not justified in violating a negative duty to do harm to not to harm others in order to fulfill a positive duty of helping someone. Using this line of reasoning, Foot's version of the trolley problem can be said to present a conflict between two negative duties. In other words, the driver of the trolley can ask the following: is it my duty not to harm the individual, or not to harm five individuals? And the answer, according to Foot, is obviously the latter, since it leads to less harm. Okay, so it goes on to, however, in the footbridge scenario, however, one faces a conflict between a negative duty and a positive duty, namely the duty of not harming the fat man on the footbridge, the positive duty of saving lives of 5 workmen on the track. In this case, Foot would argue that since the saving of lives of the 5 workmen requires doing significant harm, indeed killing the fat man, one is not morally justified in doing it, which I think was something that was put up in um, the last article. And I think this we said this Thompson had a slightly different point of view. She agreed with Foot on just what the morally superior action was. She disagreed as to why one should act that way. In Thompson's view, the real distinction lies between deflecting a threat from a larger group onto a smaller group and bringing a different threat to bear on the smaller group. Using this premise, she argued it is morally justified to steer the trolley onto the track with as one workman, since they would be able to deflect the threat from the 5 workmen, the larger group, to the smaller group, the one workman, and it's morally unjust. It's morally unjustified to push the man off the bridge, since that would be creating an entirely new threat for him. In the response to the problem, philosophers influenced by Kant have argued that one ought to not to use human beings as a means to save others. So it would be morally right to steer the trolley away from the 5, but morally wrong to push the man off the bridge. And some have questioned that the very assumption that one is morally obliged to minimize harm, or to bring about the death of as few people as possible. But the question remains, what's the solution? So that's an interesting one. In my world, it's justified immorality. I like that. There's just seeing what's just kind of catching up a bit on what's going on with the chat here. Yeah, I mean, again, there's versions like this one, the torturing thing. I'm pretty sure didn't you and Dave actually talk about this on an AIR stream, Joe? I'm trying to remember. I think you did. I can't remember which one it is, but I'll finish off the last bit of this article, and it says, this is from Philosophy Now. It says, no solution, no problem. And the author of this says, the answer, in my view, is that there's no definitive solution. Like most philosophical problems, the trolley problem is not designed to have a solution. It is rather intended to provoke thought and create an intellectual discourse in which the difficulty of resolving moral dilemmas is appreciated and our limitations as moral agents are recognized. The ongoing discourse over the trolley problem is not a discourse about solutions per se. After all, in both scenarios of the problem, there are only 2 ways in which one could act, but one that places significance on reasons. This is not to say, however, that every opinion on the trolley problem is perfectly legitimate. We should acknowledge that there are more or less justifiable resolutions to the trolley problem, or any moral dilemma for that matter, and that it's only through reason and rational argumentation that we can converge upon them. As we saw in the agreement over the right response between Foot and Thompson, most of us differ in the reasons in which we prefer one solution to the trolley problem over another. Most people agree on the solution. That is why the trolley problem has kept the trolley problem alive amongst philosophers for nearly 50 years. Dear. I do not believe there's ever going to be a perfect solution, nor a consensus as to the best possible solutions. All we can hope for, or we should hope for, as I've argued, is to utilize tools of philosophy as well as a scientific method to continue this discourse. The trolley problem does not have to be resolved. It merely has to be contemplated and to be the topic of our conversations from time to time. I think that's a good way to wrap that one up about the trolley problem. And I think that's probably correct. I don't think it is something that necessarily it has to be. It's not something really that necessarily needs to be solved. It's the conversation about what you do in the situation, the moral conversation, which is the fascinating thing there, which is what I think about this. So I've gone on for about 25 minutes or so on the trolley problem. Um, So I thought I'd do that because I know most people have somewhat heard of that, or have heard a variation of that. Um, or I'm sure at some point someone's been asked this kind of question of, if you go this way, or that way, you can't do both. That you to be put in that situation where there is a moral dilemma, you got to pick an option. Neither option is perfect, and I mean, and this is the thing we will always try. We'll always try with these, and like I said, anyone who's watched one of Critical Cripples streams knows that we've tried to find a way of getting around the problem as much as possible if we catch a little semantic. Now, I normally did that to piss Critical Cripple off, to be honest, but I get the spirit of the question was generally, it was all there was a lot of different variations of the trolley dilemma. If anyone's ever watched those shows or taken part in them, we but I'm sure it's something we've all um, contemplated at some point or have had a variation of that. So I'm going to get back to what I did last time, because as I pointed out, I am an atheist. Therefore, I do atheist content. So I've been like I did last time because I've been reading this bit thing for often. I would suggest anyone get this. It's a especially if you're an atheist and you want an introduction to some of the philosophical arguments around atheism and some common arguments. I suggest this one, "Atheism: The Basics" by Graham Oppy, who's a absolutely fantastic philosopher. But this is a little bit more. Um, this is more entry level stuff, but I think it's but I honestly got to believe I can honestly tell you, having sort of read through some of this, that there are a lot of fellow atheists in the community, some with big voices who are not even at this level, in terms of their way they think and the way they, should we say, with some of the arguments they have with theists. So what I tend to do, I just tend to pick something at random out of this one. And what have we got here? Okay, this is from the section called common complaints. Okay, and this is like the arguments you're going to hear against atheism. So 5.10, atheism is irrational. So this is the common complaints here. Okay. There are various ways in which atheism is said to be irrational. Some say that atheism is rationally self defeating. Some say that atheism is rationally defined by logic. Some say that atheism is rationally defeated by evidence. Some say, atheism is rationally defeated by prudence. I shall examine so Oppie is going to examine each of these claims in turn. I know, I know. Hopefully, we'll see. We'll see if might be an answer in here. Okay. Yeah, yeah. All right, Daft. All right, Daft nerdy. It's okay. First thing, self defeat. It seems possible for there to be self defeating claims. If I say I am unable to speak, and what I say is interrupted in a completely flat footed, literal manner, then that it seems that my speaking contradicts the content of what I say. Um, if I say I am a solipsist as a move in a conversation that I'm having with someone else, it seems that my making that conventional move contradicts the content of the words that what I utter. Um, but if I utter the words "there are no gods," um, no similar considerations apply, even if I am a god, and I sincerely utter those words. While it will be true that I am mistaken about who I am, it seems I will not be right to say my utterance is self-defeating. It's quite good so far. Compare the case of someone who claims to be 182 centimeters tall, when in fact they're only 176 centimeters tall. What they claim is false, but they're making the claim is not in any sense self-defeating. Some may object to this analysis. The claim is that um, there are no god. The claim no gods are self-defeating, because anyone saying that there are no gods presupposes that there are gods. This allegation is slippery. One way of understanding it is being claimed that those who utter the words "there are no gods" themselves suppose that there are gods, and that they would not be uttering those words if there were gods. One on a second way of understanding what is being claimed, while those who utter the words "there are no gods" do not themselves suppose that there are gods, and that they would be not be uttering the words if there were no gods nonetheless. It is true that there are no gods, and they would be not uttering the words if there were no gods. Okay. On the first interpretation, the obvious thing is to say that atheists do not themselves suppose that there are gods, and that they would be would not be uttering these words if there were no gods. So on the first interpretation, it's just a mistake to claim that it is self-defeating for atheists to say there are no gods. On the contrary, when atheists say that there are no gods, they are giving an entirely unproblematic formulation on the belief that is a characteristic of atheists. On the second interpretation, the obvious thing to say is that in fact there are other people who suppose that there are gods, and they would not be uttering those words if no gods if if there are if no gods provides no reason at all for them saying that atheism is self-defeating. Of course, if those who say that there are no gods, and they would be not be uttering those words if there were no gods, are correct, then atheism is false. But equally, if atheism is true, then those who say there are no gods, and they would not be uttering those words if there were no gods, are mistaken. That people disagree about a bunch of claims is typically no great grounds for claiming that the position of those on one side of the dispute is self-defeating. As long as we are careful about giving it unambiguous interpretations of the claims about presupposition, there are no way in which we can show that the claim there are no gods presupposes the claim that there are gods. That's an interesting little thing. So I'm keeping an eye on the time here, but okay, I've got a few more minutes here. So people will like me just reading through Oppie so far. I think this is interesting. Like I said, I think this is something. I do think this is a book. I suggest all atheists, especially well, I'd say all online atheists, especially, really ought to read this. It's a good introduction to a lot of these topics. Now, so that's the sort of thing on the thing is it self-defeating? Now I'm sure I'll read the rest of this bit, or do you want me to go on to what should I go to something else? Okay. So that's from a section that was from a section called Common Complaints, which is a lot of the common arguments you'll hear against atheism. Um, let's have a little look here. Let's go to reasons and arguments. Atheism is a default. Now we did that last time, and why that's wrong. Um, okay. Atheists don't exist because we're all actually the null hypothesis. Yeah, I was going to say the whole atheism is the default position on stroke null hypothesis. I covered that one last time because Oppie covers it here and why we probably shouldn't be using that argument. And I do happen to agree with Oppie on that, and it's that atheism is not is not really the default position or a null hypothesis. I But let's try this one. 6.6. Theism is meaningless. So this might be so Ayer, 1936, claims that the sentence "There are no gods" has no literal significance according to Ayer's verificationist theory of meaning. There are only two kinds of literally significant sentences: those that express analytic truths, truths of logic, truths of mathematics, and truths so solely in the virtue and meanings of the words, and those for which there are actual or possible observations that are relevant to the determination of their truth or falsity. Applying his theory, Ayer claims that there are no gods is not true in virtue of meaning, and second, that there are no actual or possible observations that are relevant to the truth or falsity of there are gods. Few dispute the claim that there are no gods is not true in virtue of meaning. However, many deny that there are no actual or possible observations, so that the relevant truth or falsity of the statement there are gods. Some theists claim to have made observations that directly support theisms. Indeed, some claim to have perceived gods. Many people, theists and atheists alike, claim to have described uh, possible courses of experience that would directly support theism. Of course, some atheists deny that there are any such possible courses of experience. But an argument that contains the premise that there are no possible courses of experience that are relevant to the truth or falsity of there are gods cannot show that there is an internal problem with those theistic worldviews that accept possible observations that would directly support theism and or that there are actual observations that directly support theism. Okay. Ayers claimed that there are only two kinds of literally significant sentences, has very few supporters amongst contemporary philosophers. While it would take us too far afield to explore this matter, it is worth noting that Ayers' objectification to theism simply lapses if his verificationist theory of meaning is rejected. Moreover, it is also worth noting that by Ayer's own lights, if the claim that there are gods is meaningless, then so too is the claim. Pages are stuck. That there are no gods. So, if we follow Ayer's own view of things, his argument cannot offer support for atheism. Perhaps it's worth noting that we must follow Ayer on this last point. We might suppose, instead of that, if it is true that the sentence "there are no gods" has no literal significance, then it follows that the claim that there are no gods is true. if we take this view, then Aya's assumptions do indeed entail that there are no gods. But unless best theistic big pictures include both the claim that Aya's verificationist theory of meaning is correct and the claim that there are no possible causes of experience that are relevant to the truth or falsity of that there are no gods. This entailment yields no reason at all to suppose that there is a serious internal challenge to the best theistic big pictures. So it's a long way of probably a long way of saying theism is meaningless is probably not a good way to go. Is the I believe is the short answer to that one. Okay, so any comments anyone wants to make in the chat? Because I've got a few more minutes before I'm going to have to wrap this up. So, you know, anyone's got anything they want to add in here? As I said, this is something I'm kind of. I want to do more of these. I'm going to try and find a more regular time slot. Start forming, so I can do this a bit more at the same time. It's a bit difficult for me, unfortunately, to schedule things regularly at the moment. But the whole premise is this: is, as I said, I'm a philosophical noob, trying to, really trying to dive into these topics, and I expect to get things wrong, and I expect to sometimes have my thought processes maybe not working the most, might not to be the most logical at times. It's so it's yeah, I'm kind of, but I'm interested in diving into these topics, trying to just understand them a bit more, and trying to get better at some of the arguments because I've noticed, like I said, that I see a lot of people on our own side in the atheist camp that I think are making some bad arguments uh, ag- against theists at times, bad arguments and bad memes. I'd like us to get better. So I think the best for, in that respect, it's all right me saying people we should get better at this. But I've got to put my money where my mouth is and try and get better at this stuff myself. So that's kind of the premise of this. And again, I might sort of do some things where I can open it up to some. Might do a few more of these where I open it up and get some people in who maybe are a bit better at this stuff than me, or maybe even some people who are, just as inept on this stuff as I am, but are kind of curious to learn more and ask some questions. I think that's probably the way to go with this. Okay, so I'm going to sign off in a few minutes, but before I do, I'm going to put a link in the chat. And that is the Friday night six pack on hereticals is starting in about 15 minutes or so. So I please suggest everyone go over there. I always, without fail, even if I'm working, will have Friday night six pack on in my earphones whilst I'm going round, even when I'm working. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and as I said, I expect to make mistakes. I expect to get stuff wrong. You guys are like on a you guys are on a whole different level to me with this stuff. You know, dog. I'm a firm believer that philosophy does not belong in religion. Okay, I don't think we should have that conversation now, dog. Okay, I'm not sure I agree. I'm not entirely sure I agree, but I actually think that is that could be a fantastic conversation at some point. So we'll hold that thought. I think that's something worth discussing at a later date. Okay, so there's a link in the chat there. Friday night six pack on Hereticals is coming up. I said just under 15 minutes. Hopefully we'll see you. I'll see you all over there. So you know, okay. See, I'll sign off. I won't sign off with my normal salute. With my normal salute thing. I'll sign off with this. I'm going to quote my favorite philosopher of all time. And I think this is one of the most profound philosophical utterances ever said. All we are is dust in the wind, dude. Ted Theodore Logan. All right, see you later. Salute.